Okay, so this is for the Ilu Nishmat, Mike Krasner, Avron's dad, who passed away a couple of days ago. Her funeral was yesterday. I don't know his Hebrew name, but he did a lot of chesed for the community with the Sel and Siegel and other organizations. That he took people in Tiolim and took the kids to shul, and was the grand president of the Hebrew Order of David for many decades, and was involved just in chesed and just a positive, pasimcha person who did amazing things. So this is for him. And okay, so I'm going to discuss Marit Ayin. Marit Ayin, as you know, is creating a certain impression. That's what it actually means in English. Creating an impression that something is allowable. Like if you see an oak wearing a yarmulke in a McDonald's, then you'll think it's kosher. So people shouldn't, or someone wearing their tzitzit out at a McDonald's, you'll think, because he's sitting there, maybe we can eat here. So if one has to go meet people there, tuck your tzitzit in, wear a baseball cap, don't wear your yarmulke there if you have to go such places. So Marit Ayin with regards to Shabbos, even arrangements that are inherently permitted are forbidden when they create the misleading appearance of a forbidden arrangement. Thus, in an area where a certain business is typically managed by a forbidden arrangement, that is by a sachir, that's a type of contractor, even a permitted arrangement is forbidden due to Marit Ayin. That's obviously if a Jew owns the business. Therefore, one may not lease or enlist an aris, A-R-I-S, to manage the property that would typically be managed by a sachir, such as a bathhouse, since people would think that the worker is sachir. The rules of Marit Ayin depend on the norms that exist in any given society. In places where forbidden and permitted arrangements are equally common, it seems that the issue of Marit Ayin applies. Now, there are 5 exceptions here. It'll take me about a minute or so, then we'll be finished with it. Won't be long. In the following cases, there's no issue of Marit Ayin, even for a property that would typically involve a forbidden arrangement. First one, long-term arrangement. The property was leased to a non-Jew for several years, such that people realize that the non-Jew is a tenant and not an employee. The non-Jew may then operate the property on Shabbos. B, if a permitted arrangement such as leasing is common for a certain type of property, then all permitted arrangements such as arisus may be used even if they are uncommon with no connection to Marit Ayin. C, if a Jew recently purchased a property from a non-Jew, he may lease it to a different non-Jew for work as long as the Jew has not yet worked it. If a Jew leased a property from a non-Jew, he may sublet it to another non-Jew even after having worked the property himself. D, private location. If a property such as a bathhouse is located within one's private property and is used only by one's household members, who would know that he is leasing it in a permitted manner, there is no issue of Marit Ayin. And lastly, remote location. If the business is not within the Tchum Shabbos of any Jewish population, it is permitted. Even if it is located within the Tchum Shabbos, but distant from the owner's property, such that it is not common knowledge that the Jew owns it, some opinions contend that there is no issue of Marit Ayin.
Okay. Thank you, Kev. Okay, I really, really wish our dear friend long life for the loss of his father. He's a wonderful human being. I never met his. Okay, Arthur, you can hear me? Thumbs up. All right, guys, let's get started without any further ado. The Gemara suggests that the dispute between Abaye and Rava may be of Tanaic origin, because remember we learned that Abaye and Rava are Amoraim. So basically, if there were 2 witnesses testifying about the defendant that he stole, and they themselves also testified about him that he slaughtered the stolen animal, and they were subsequently rendered Adim Zomimim, conspiring witnesses on the theft, their testimony, which became partially invalidated, is totally invalidated. Now, guys, that's very simple, because although they weren't exposed as zomamim on the slaughter, their testimony regarding the slaughter is automatically invalidated, because if there's no proof that the defendant stole the animal, he cannot be held liable for slaughtering it. So the defendant is therefore exempt, while the first witnesses have to pay the twofold payment for being zomamim regarding the theft. They don't have to pay the threefold payment for the slaughter, okay? Because they haven't been proven zomamim on that. Whether or not they were lying on that, as Gavin said yesterday, probably likely, but we actually would need testimony where other witnesses said that the first set of witnesses were with them when they testified about the slaughter. So they weren't. So as far as that's concerned, the slaughter part has been disabled, but even if they subsequently exposed as zomamim on the slaughter and their second set of witnesses that said that they lied about their whereabouts there too, they're still not liable to the threefold payment. And guys, this is the principle I want you to remember, is because their hazama, which is the reciprocal penalty on the theft, already renders their testimony regarding the slaughter irrelevant, according to Rashi. It's basically disabled their testimony, because if they were lying about the theft, then there wouldn't be a crime for slaughtering an animal or selling an animal that was their own. That's absolutely obvious, okay? However, if they were rendered zomamim on the slaughter, but not the theft, so we're going, the defendant pays the twofold payment, obviously. Why? Because in that case, is that the person in the defendant is actually not exonerated for the theft charge. He's zomamim, he might have actually committed the theft legitimately, and the witnesses just don't particularly like him, and they thought they might as well make him pay an extra threefold. But when they were caught out lying about the slaughter, doesn't necessarily mean that he never stole. So therefore, the defendant pays the twofold payment unless there's evidence to the contrary, and the conspiring witnesses pay the threefold payment. So remember yesterday, Rav Yossi said, in regard to what was this last ruling said, in regards to two sets of witnesses, one testifying to the theft, and another set testifying to the slaughter, two sets of witnesses. But in regard to one set of witnesses who testified to both the theft and the slaughter, we say that even though they were found to be conspiring witnesses only on the slaughter when they were caught out, their testimony, which becomes partially invalidated, is totally invalidated. Because obviously it's one long testimony. So as Gavin once said to us, I think 3 or 4 days ago, that if it's done within the time of an utterance, even though they're accusing separately in terms of the theft and the slaughter, if it's at one hearing on one day, then in that particular case, it's seen as one testimony, and therefore if they rendered zomamim on the slaughter, they rendered zomamim on the theft, and that is actually thrown out of court. And Kevin asked a brilliant question. He said to me, well, what happens if the defendant actually committed the crime over 2 days? And we said to Kevin that at the end of the day, many crimes are committed over a period of time. It takes time to hack somebody, it takes time to hide the bodies, it takes time for theft, and it takes time to sell the stolen merchandise or slaughter it or whatever. That's not the issue. The issue is when the witnesses testify. If they testify, if there's two sets of witnesses and they testify and they only made zomamim on the slaughter, then we can trust the character witnesses with regards to the theft because they're separate people. But if it's one group of witnesses testifying to the theft and slaughter, as Gavin quite rightly said yesterday, how do we even trust their ethics? Because if they were lying about the slaughter, their character probably isn't that good, and they're lying about the theft as well. So Gavin, well done on that, and Kevin, well done on that. Okay? So a simple reading of Rav Yossi's statement suggests that Rav Yossi is differentiating between testimonies regarding the theft and slaughter given by two different sets of witnesses. And he's comparing that with testimonies given by the same set of witnesses for both the theft and the slaughter. But the Gemara is saying this interpretation can't be correct. Why? Because what does Rav Yossi mean when he says two sets of witnesses, and what does he mean when he says one set of witnesses? So if his two sets of witnesses means literally two sets of witnesses, in other words, two different groups of witnesses, one that testified about the theft and another group that testified about the slaughter, and his definition, by contrast of one set of witnesses, means that there's a single group of witnesses who testified to both crimes, but with one testimony coming at separate times. Then, if so, then Rav Yossi is saying that there is only one set of witnesses. In other words, a single group of witnesses testifying to both the theft and the slaughter is one testimony at two separate junctures, so that when they testify to the theft and then later to the slaughter, they are rendered zomamim on the slaughter. We say their testimony, which has become partially invalidated, is totally invalidated, and they're rendered zomamim on the theft as well. And why is this? This is exactly for the reason Gavin said, which was quite astute, is that if the guys are dodgy characters, how do we trust them? That was, Gavin, that was your point, yeah?
It's the same point over and over. I keep saying it, you're 100%.
Yeah, and we're agreeing. So the thing of it is, what you've got to bear in mind is that there is a bit of a problem that the Gemara has with this logic. And what was the problem that we said yesterday? What was the problem? It's logical. You're good at this.
Yeah, but I'm in the best place. Anybody else?
Are you talking about what case is Damon? On what case with the?
No. On this particular question. Listen, Gavin's question was good. So what he said is, listen, if it's a single set of witnesses, this is how he on first value look at Rav Yossi's statement. He said, Gavin was saying that if there's a single set of witnesses and they testifying to both the theft and the slaughter, even if it's on 5 p.m. Jeez.
Don't worry. Okay, taken care of.
So even if, as Gavin said, Kev, even if the witnesses, it's two sets of witnesses, okay, and they're testifying at, and they got caught out in the slaughter, it's a different set of witnesses that testify to the theft. So that way, their testimony on the theft is still valid because it's not the same two cagey lying individuals. But if you've got a single set of witnesses that testify to the theft and slaughter, even if they're caught out on the theft, obviously there's no zomamim payment on the slaughter because their testimony folds at that point, and then if there's no theft, there's no slaughter. But the chidush here with Rav Yossi is that if they even caught out a zomamim on the slaughter, there's no charge for the theft of Adam zomamim. Why? Because we can't trust their character, therefore they are discredited. However, Gavin, the point of it is they have to pay the single set of witnesses based on their false testimony regarding the slaughter, but they don't have to pay the double penalty regarding the theft, because unless other witnesses say that the first that same set of witnesses was elsewhere with regards to the theft, they're not made to pay the reciprocal penalty. There's just, you can't believe them, that's all. So they're only paying where they were caught out in terms of being in a different location, which is fair, but the thief either way gets off because he's not a thief, because we don't believe their testimony at all. So there's still a problem here, and that problem logically, guys, is that you still need to follow a certain law principle that you can't disqualify testimony if there is no witnesses testifying to the contrary. You might doubt their credibility, but there has to be witnesses that say that when they claim to the theft, that this guy committed the theft, that in fact they were not there. They could have genuinely witnessed the theft, but didn't like this guy anyway, and just thought they'd added slaughter to the mix. And Gavin's right, it's probably likely that they lied. But you cannot, unless you've got witnesses testifying that the same set of witnesses were in a different place, like you had a second set of witnesses saying that they couldn't have viewed the slaughter. We have to believe them regarding the theft, because due process has to be followed legally, Gavin. Even if, you know, they're dodgy. It's the way it is.
Damon.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say Zumamim, they gave a false date. They didn't give let's say the thief did actually steal the ox or the sheep, and the Zumamim gave the wrong date. How does it work with payment? If there's a Zumamim payment, do they pay the person who they're accusing of, and then does he then pay the actual owner who stole it from, if it was stolen? What actually happens practically?
You're asking two separate questions. The one, if there was an erroneous date that they made them. Are you asking if they lied about it or they mixed it up?
Well, let's say it did actually happen, but they gave the wrong date, so they're not credible.
Well, then if they gave the wrong date, and other people can say that they weren't there on that date because they've been seen elsewhere, then for being, even if they were dozy, there's a lot at stake here, so we definitely make them pay the reciprocal penalty. Absolutely.
And who do they pay the? Okay, then do they pay it
to the damaged party, the person that they would have made pay unnecessarily. Not to the court.
What happens if he did actually steal it and they gave the wrong date?
Well, then for being dozy, he's not caught on earth; he's caught in Shemaim, and the other guys actually have to pay because. Had he been innocent, we don't know if he was innocent or not, but let's say he was guilty, only Hashem knows. And the thing of it is, for the fact that they troubled the court and they couldn't get their date right, they have to pay a reciprocal penalty to the thief. So the thief made money on the stolen item, and he made money on the mogginess and stupidity of the witnesses. But in Shemaim, it all gets sorted out. That's
okay. So he does. Okay, he doesn't have to pay over. Because their witness, their testimony was not accurate.
Of course, he has to pay over because
to the original owner.
He
doesn't. So he actually gains.
He benefits.
Of course.
He gets a reciprocal penalty, and he gets away with it because the witnesses were dozy and didn't make the right date. Of course, these things happen. But let's just get back to the main point. Gavin, the main problem is, even though you're right that they are probably cagey, one set of witnesses, and if they're caught lying about the slaughter, they probably were with the theft. But with regards to the slaughter, another set of witnesses said they couldn't have viewed the slaughtering because they were somewhere else. So unless you've got evidence that these two witnesses lied about the theft, you can't just cancel out the theft penalty that the thief must pay, even though we should. There has to be certain rules. Okay. Now, one other thing, Gavin. So then we have to reanalyze Rav Yossi's statement. So Rav Yossi's statement now goes as follows. Okay. Rather, when Rav Yossi speaks of two sets of witnesses, he must be referring to one set of witnesses that is like two sets. And what's that, Gavin? It's when you have one group of witnesses that testified about the theft and slaughter at two different times. That's what we mean, as though it looks like two sets of witnesses, because it's happening at two separate times, but it's actually one set of witnesses. And we'll hit the logic right now. Because accordingly, Rav Yossi is saying that if they're found to be Zomamim regarding the slaughter, the earlier testimony regarding the theft remains valid. Why, Gavin?
Because of the fact that you don't have any proof, you've got no other witnesses.
Correct. But there's also a concept that if they did it at one time juncture in terms of their testimony, it's seen as one statement, even though it was two. So the person gets up. If the witnesses get up and they testify on the Tuesday that this guy stole the animal on the Sunday, and they testify on the Wednesday that he slaughtered the animal on the Monday, and witnesses come on the Thursday and say that these witnesses couldn't have viewed the slaughter because they were with them in Yovel, then in that particular case, the false witnesses have to pay the threefold payment. Okay? But unless the defendant has got witnesses that place him elsewhere at the time that the witnesses say he was there, or other witnesses come and say that the witnesses against this defendant were in another place for the theft, they're seen as two separate testimonies, and therefore the theft testimony still remains valid. But if they get to court on the Wednesday and they say on the Sunday he stole the animal and on the Monday he slaughtered it, Kevin, then that's done in one statement. And since it's done in one statement, it's seen as one testimony because it's at one time juncture that they've provided evidence. And even if the crime occurred over 2 days, but so the guy says, the guys turn around and say, we swear that he stole the animal on the Sunday and he slaughtered it on the Monday, and they say this on the Wednesday. Okay, one statement. Then when they're caught to be lying as far as the slaughter is concerned, we struck off the entire testimony in that day because it's seen as one solid testimony, Gavin, and therefore it's all invalidated.
No, I didn't hear you say it was one utterance. That was my fault. I didn't hear you. Sorry.
No problem. So in other words...
I thought it was two separate...
No. So if it's one set of witnesses that's testified at a single time and they were exposed to Zomamim on the slaughter, their testimony regarding the theft does not remain valid because it's seen as one time juncture. So that's how we've reinterpreted it. It's not that they're two sets of witnesses, but it's one set of witnesses doing testimony twice versus doing testimony at one juncture. Okay, so that adds a lot of clarity to that. Now, one other point is now that we've established the dispute between Rav Yossi and the rabbis actually concerns the case where there's only one set of witnesses, guys, and they testified about the theft and the slaughter at the same time. The Gemara is now developing the basis for its suggestion that this point of dispute between Rav Yossi and the Bava Kamma, which are Tanoim, is the issue disputed by Abai and Rava. In other words, the Amoraim mimic the Tanoim in this regard. Okay? So, and they said, and who's they? The rabbis of the academy who sought to demonstrate that the dispute between Abai and Rava is actually a matter of Tanoim dispute. They assume that all Tanaim of the Brisa, when it says the Bava Kamma, it means the majority of the opinion, but it's the anonymous opinion that comes through. They agree that one statement made after another when in the time required for an utterance is viewed as the same utterance. I mean, it's seen as one testimony. Okay? But, so we say, okay, is it not that they argue that this very point, that the rabbis hold a conspiring witness is disqualified only from now and onward, since it's only from that time, from the time that they exposed that they disqualified as Zomamim, but not reactively to the time of the testimony, it follows on the slaughter for which they have been exposed as Zomamim, they are deed Zomamim, and therefore pay the threefold payment, but with respect to the testimony on the theft for which they have not been exposed as Zomamim, they are not Zomamim. And the accused therefore pays the double payment for theft. So I'm just reading that from the Gemara. Let me explain it in a simple Damon language. Rav Yossi holds, okay, completely differently. If it's done, the testimony on the Wednesday about the theft on the Sunday, Kevin, and the slaughter on the Monday, and it's one testimony, then the minute they're caught lying about the slaughter, the whole testimony for that day is thrown out because it's seen as one testimony. The rabbis disagree. The rabbis still see it as two different testimonies because they say there's no retroactive disqualification. Therefore, the rabbis of the Tanaic rabbis hold like Rava, because Rava says there's no retroactive disqualification. So only at the point where they caught out about the slaughter, even if it's within one utterance, the rabbis hold like Rava. that there's no disqualification regarding the theft. Therefore, they only have to pay the reciprocal payment on the slaughter. But the theft is still valid, and therefore the defendant has to pay the double payment for the theft. That's very clear. Rav Yossi is holding like a buyer. By the way the halacha goes, according to a buyer. But Rav Yossi is a lone opinion, and it's very interesting that we end up saying that the halacha goes with the lone opinion. It's quite rare. It's only 6 cases in Shas that it goes with the buyer as opposed to Rabbah. Because Rabbah seems to get a lot of support from the Tana Kamma in these other cases. So what we're saying is, Gavin, is Rav Yossi is saying no. If it's in one utterance and not at 2 separate testimony dates, therefore that entire testimony is seen as one, and it's struck off the roll when they're caught as being Adim Zomamim with regards to the slaughter. So Gavin, what actually happens is as follows. Is they're not made to pay the double payment on the theft because they weren't caught out by other witnesses on the theft. So, but the defendant doesn't pay that double payment either because they're discredited, they're not trusted. So they only pay the threefold payment when they were caught lying about being in the location of the slaughter, when they couldn't have been there because other witnesses says you were with us in Yovel. But regarding the theft, the defendant doesn't pay, because we don't believe them, according to Rav Yossi. But the false witnesses don't pay either because there's no other witnesses, Gavin, that testify to the fact that they were lying about the theft. So everybody wins. Okay? But that's not what the Tana Kamma and the rabbis say. They hold with Rabbah that, in fact, you can't work on the character issue, because even within the time of a single utterance or a single testimony, when they were lying about the slaughter, and there were witnesses testifying to that, so they pay the threefold on the slaughter. But unless there's other witnesses that say that they weren't there regarding the theft, the defendant pays a double payment for the theft. That's it. You and I are more inclined to go by a buyer, but the point of it is we have to stretch ourselves and say that there are rules within the court. So what I've done here is I've taken a very complicated concept and made it quite simple. Okay? So I thought that would hold. I thought that would make sense, guys. Right. Now, the Gemara rejects the assertion that the Tanaim dispute this point. Okay? And they suggest an alternative interpretation. They say, now this is an interesting part, that it's not necessary so that Rav Yossi and the rabbis are even disputing whether a conspiring witness becomes disqualified retroactively. Rather, it can be said that if all the Tanaim agree that one statement made after another within the time required for utterance is viewed as part of the same utterance, all would agree that testimony to the theft is also invalidated because a Zomaim, a conspiring witness, is disqualified retroactively from the moment he testified. So, according to this other interpretation, Gavin would be satisfied. But here, Gavin, is where we're having an exception. They're disputing whether a statement made after a statement within the time required for utterance is viewed as the same utterance. Okay, so that's the trick. That's what they say, is that they're disputing a different point, is that if a statement is made after a statement within the time required for an utterance is viewed as part of the same utterance. In other words, how does the brain work? Does it mean when a witness comes up and says on the Wednesday, yes, he stole the animal on the Sunday and he slaughtered on the Monday? Is that part of one testimony, or does the brain work differently, that he thinks about the theft first and then separately in his mind he thinks back to the slaughter? So even though it's within one utterance, and it's actually 2 different thought processes in his head, and therefore it's seen as 2 different statements. That's where they're arguing. And it's actually a valid point, because we don't, unless you're lying, if you're telling the truth, you're actually thinking back to the time in which it happened, if you're not rehearsing it and trying to get somebody caught out. Am I right? You're thinking back to the event, right? It's only when you've got your stock standard lines that you're going to say, I'm going to nail this guy, and bang, 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 etc. But when you're thinking about an event, you might say it similarly, but you're thinking about it in two separate ways when it happened. So the rabbis hold that a statement made after another statement within the time required for an utterance is not actually viewed as the same utterance. So therefore, even though their testimonies regarding the theft and the slaughter took place on the same day, in terms of when they made the testimony, not Kevin when the crime was committed, but when the witnesses made the testimony, they are actually considered as two separate testimonies. Because if the person, even though he gives the testimony on the same day, is thinking about each event. So the invalidation of the second part of the testimony, slaughter, through conspiring witnesses doesn't invalidate the first part of the theft. So even though the disqualification would take effect retroactively, it can only go back to the time that they were testified about the slaughter and they were caught lying, but not to the time they testified about the theft, which constitutes a separate testimony, even though it happened on the same day, because witnesses think about it in terms of the events and the days at which they transpired, which answers Kevin's question. So the testimony about the theft remains valid. That's what Rashi clears up for us. But Rav Yossi holds that one statement made after another statement within the time required for an utterance is viewed as the part of the same utterance. In other words, accordingly, both statements are considered one testimony, and since they disqualified retroactively from the time they testified about the slaughter, they're considered to have been disqualified at the time about the theft as well, because it's seen as part of one long legal testimony. It's not talking about how the brain works. It talks about what can be considered a testimony within a given day within a court trial. So the rabbis are coming in to say, how does somebody think about something? And Rav Yossi is saying, no, we have to look at the stenographer's records and see how the case was done. If it was done within the witness box on the same day, you can look at all that testimony and discredit all of it if some of it is invalidated. Because the rabbis say people don't think like that. They might have been caught lying on the one, but the other side, they might be true. Let me give you a practical case. Gavin, I know you say that the character is in jeopardy, but I want you to think of it in terms of a slightly different way. Sometimes it has been known that a person witnesses a crime, but he himself is an adulterer. Now, the oak doesn't want to lose a 16-year marriage and custody of his kids, and he doesn't want to lose half of the money he's accrued in his life in the divorce settlement when he's caught with his mistress, right? So what happens is he lies about it because he actually did witness a crime, but the crime happened in two parts. Now he realized, gee, on the one day he did see it, and when the rest of the crime took place, he was actually with his mistress. Or maybe he saw part of the crime, but the other one he saw out of the witness box when he was with his mistress at the Protea Hotel. So now he doesn't want to tank his marriage, his custody, and half his life savings. So suddenly the witness comes out and says, I'm not sure where I saw it, I'm not sure what are they going to say? What do you think of the Protea Hotel playing Scrabble with this knockout 25-year-old and you're 50? She doesn't have a brain in her head. What do you mean playing Scrabble? You're going to win. You're playing canasta more like. So since that's the case, the oak's going to be in trouble. So he doesn't quite know what to say because part of it is truthful and part of it is a lie because where was he caught out viewing this incident? Just so happened to see a crime while he was committing a crime himself. So, I mean, these things do happen, Kabb. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is the issue.
You got to look at the words. You're talking about Scrabble. It's all in the words. Eh?
It's all in the words, man. It's all in the words. So, what we're going to do is I don't want to carry on at this point today. I actually want to finish a little bit early. I'm not going to drag it out for all it's worth because I think you guys have done enough. And you're going to be fatigued. The part we're going to go through next is we're going to see where Rav Yossi doesn't hold that in a different case where a testimony done at the same juncture is actually seen as one testimony. So we're going to say, wow, why are you having a different opinion in this other case? And we're going to ask on it, but not for this time. You've got enough to process.
Damon, so you said earlier, you were talking about if the witnesses gave false testimony on the slaughter, the thief pays the twofold. But what happens if did you discuss if the false testimony was given on the theft, but the slaughter did take place? The slaughter was legit testimony. Have you discussed that? You were just you covered this earlier.
I tell you what, I did cover it earlier, but I tell you where we've got an urgency. Gavin has to daven mincha now because it's 5:22. So I want to end now so that Gavin.
Oh yes, I
did cover it. Gav, quickly go daven mincha. You don't have much time.
Yeah, thank you.